Sunday at Wayland U.S. 30 Drag Strip, where the great ones ride.
With GM on the sidelines, it was up to Mopar and Ford to provide the excitement of the stock classes. No worries, they were up to the task. Now, the racers decided to see how far they could push the envelope with this factory experimental thing.
In our 64 FX car, we moved the front wheels forward, I think it was 4 inches, and the rear wheels forward 4 inches. For 65, we decided that we'd go just a little bit more radical. So we moved the front wheels forward 10 inches and moved the rear wheels forward 15. They brought NHRA in to show them what our next factory experimental car would be. And they went away and said, no way, no way.
But despite NHRA's reluctance, the Go Fast Genie was way out of the bottle by now, and there was no putting him back in.
There were certain teams around the country that were going to have the altered wheelbase cars. Ford and Mercury were doing it too.
The Hemi was back this year, making the Mopars the dominant door slammers. Ford immediately countered with a real ringer. The single overhead cam engine, aka the sock motor, or just the cammer, was never going to be an assembly line power plant, but it worked pretty well on the drag strip. Ford and Mercury would build several Cammer Falcons, Comets, and Mustangs for the 65 season, but not for Ronnie Sox and Buddy Martin.
When we read the contract, we had agreed verbally that it was going to be 2 personal cars, one for Ronnie, one for myself. Well, the contract read 1 personal car. And of course, you know, told Fran there might be times when Ronnie and I wanted to go somewhere different, you know. Ronnie and I talked about it, and we said, you know, needs to be 2 cars, or we just can't do this. And Fran said, well, you know, we can't do 2 cars. We can only do 1 car.
When Mercury refused to pony up a $2,500 courtesy car for Sox and Martin, they said goodbye to the most popular team in drag racing, and without knowing it, helped create a legend.
I picked up the phone and called Del Rica and told him that we'd be interested in running the Mopar. And he said, give me 2 hours and I'll call you back and give you an answer. And he called me back in 2 hours and said, get on a plane, come to Detroit. And that's how it started with Mopar.
When this deal went down, those famous red, white, and blue colors switched to Plymouth, and Sox and Martin became drag racing's A-team. All through the radical 65 and 66 seasons, the FX cars continued to blow people's minds, from Englishtown to Pomona. Amid all the smoke and fire of the AFXers, though, SuperStock was still the mother of all fender flapper drag racing. Those Saturday night run-what-you-brung match bashes were still the bread and butter for what had now become a large group of touring professional drag racers.
3,000 pounds heads up, first man to the finish line. There were a lot of tracks figured out this 3,000 pounds heads up put through the spectators in.
Match racing meant traveling all over the United States and working 8-day weeks. This soon proved to be a grind, even for these young guys who lived to race.
If you left home Thursday, you might not get into bed before Saturday or Sunday. I mean, we didn't care. You slept in the truck, riding down the road, or whatever.
By the end of 1967, Sox and Martin and more than a dozen other door slammer teams were the most popular people in drag racing. This coast-to-coast match racing had given them a personal connection with their fans that other racers just didn't have.
They knew that when they came in and paid their $4 or $5, whatever it was to get in back then, that they could walk right up to the car and the truck. They weren't going to be sitting in the stands looking 300 feet away to see, you know, what we were doing. They could walk right up there and look at the cars and talk to us, and that's what we liked, and that's what they liked.
In 1963, the Top Stock Eliminators were turning 13-second ETs, and they looked a lot like the cars in the parking lot. Now, the FXers, which had grown out of SuperStock, were running in the 8s and burning nitro. The fans loved it, but some racers missed the old-style side-by-side shootouts. Sox and Martin had been having success with an AFX CUDA, but Chrysler's racing chief Bob Cahill thought it might be time to go back to a more buyer-friendly package.
Bob Cahill, who was heading up the program at that time, called Landon and myself in and sat down, and he said, we just didn't sell a lot of fuel Barracudas this year. You know, what can we do to get back to who we are, what we sell, what we represent?
The answer was this car, the 1968 Hemi Barracuda.
Hearst was contracted by Chrysler to build about 70 darts and about 70 Cudas. And the reason why it was an outside company such as Hearst is because they were sticking the massive Hemi into the small A body. So they just figured it would be better just to have an outside firm do it. So what we have here then is a car that was built strictly purpose-built for drag racing, for SuperStock racing. Car ran a 10:20 and a quarter mile, and you know, back in '74, those were stout numbers.
Hey, when you're near it, you'll hear it. When we come back, Super becomes pro on the American muscle car. By 1968, the factory experimental cars were becoming a class unto themselves, which would become, you guessed it, funny cars. But Sox and Martin, among others, chose to dance with the one that brung them and returned to SuperStock. But now, Sox and Martin's red, white, and blue traveling roadshow was so popular around the country that the team needed help to make all their match race dates. So they called a good friend and offered him a job.
When I had the opportunity to go to work with Buddy and Ronnie, I just jumped on it.
Herb became the driver of the number 2 car in the Sox and Martin stables, and it didn't take him long to become part of the team. But just when it looked like the SuperStock Hemi darts and Cudas were unbeatable, Chevrolet decided to get back in the game.
General Motors had, after all the prodding from everybody in the racing community, had finally decided to put a 427 in the Camaro. It was going to be a real exciting time.
Gordy Faust and another racer from Detroit, Dick Ahrens, built 2 427 Camaros for SuperStock. One with a 4-speed for Gordy and one for Dick Ahrens to run in SuperStock automatic. According to Gordy Faust, Ahrens had a rather peculiar driving technique, the neutral start.
He would put the car in neutral, but he would bring it up at a slight RPM, probably 3,000 RPM. On the last yellow light, he'd drop it into first gear, of course, and the car would leave just like a stick car. Torque lights couldn't do the same thing that a Turbo 400 did. So when they tried dropping them in drive on the starting line, they were dropping them in drive at probably 4,000 or 5,000 RPM too. Well, these things were exploding like hand grenades. A few weeks after that, you go to the drag strip, and here was a sign hanging on the bottom of the Christmas tree, said no neutral starts.
By the end of the 60s, teams like Sox and Martin had made XS as professional as any form of racing. This class needed to grow into something bigger, faster, and more lucrative. It was time for something new, Pro Stock. This class would be designed by the racers.
We came up with 28 items that we thought that should be like a lightweight front bumper, lightweight wonders, or this, or that. So I put that on paper, and I went to Dallas. I presented it in front of the track operators, and NHRA bought 27 of the 28 items.
Finally, SuperStock super teams that achieved pro racer status at the big NHRA national meet. But even though Pro Stock was all new, one thing stayed the same. Those Hemis were still hard to beat.
We could make more horsepower with the Chevrolet, peak horsepower. The Hemi was a little bit less, but the Hemi had it all the way across the board. You could be out ahead of a Hemi and he'd come right back by you at the finish line.
Unfortunately for the Mopar teams, the NHRA had a way of leveling this playing field. They couldn't slow the Hemis down, but they could make them heavier. This solution delighted the GM racers, but it was a poison pill for Dodge and Plymouth.
When we were fortunate enough to win, 6 of the 8 Pro Stock races at the NHRA in 1971, and then they came and added the weight to it, it was just going to really kill us that we couldn't, you just couldn't put that much weight on us at one time. And he looked me straight in the eye, and he told me then, if I can get Ford and Chevrolet racing against each other, I don't worry about what Chrysler's going to do.
Chrysler's response was to boycott the '72 season and return to SuperStock racing with an old friend, another '68 Hemi Barracuda.
When Chrysler wanted Ronnie to drive a car in SuperStock again, he had to have a car that would fit the class. This was the best car for that class.
This time, though, Sox and Martin's car builder Dave Christie had some design input from the factory.
That's what they call a leaf link rear suspension. This was a thing that Chrysler had that they had developed for their SuperStock cars.
The suspension was designed by Chrysler Engineering and fabricated by Dave Christie in Sox and Martin's race shop. In addition, Chrysler also provided a very rare set of ultra-lightweight Corning glass windows for the Cuda. The whole car was completed in just 4 months. When NHRA factored the Hemi out of Pro Stock competition, It just started a Sox and Martin reign of terror in SuperStock again. More than any other factor, SuperStock racing was responsible for the muscle car era. An entire generation of young car buyers fell in love with their favorite Fords, Chevys, Pontiacs, and Mopars while watching Ronnie Sox, Gordy Faust, Herb McCandless, and all the other heroes take them down the quarter mile. But according to those heroes, they had as much fun as the fans.
I was a drag racer, 100% from midnight to midnight, nothing in between. That's what I wanted to do. My whole life was just devoted to that. We'd go to Indianapolis and sit all day long in the staging lanes waiting to make one stinking pass all day. If they announced over the PA system, well, guys, we don't have any money to give you this weekend, and it's been that way ever since, people would have raced for free. They'd have said, well, I want to run and make a run or two just to see what this was going to do anyway. And that's just the way it's always been.
If you were hanging over the fence back then, watching the Superstockers go at it, you have great memories. If you weren't, well, that's why we make these shows. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all the men and women who made SuperStock so much fun for so many of us. See you next time on the American Muscle Car.